The March 3rd total lunar eclipse in Virgo. A faded release before a new chapter. Have you felt it lately? A subtle restlessness, an inner stir, a sense that something in your life is quietly coming to an end, even if you cannot yet name it. Over the past few weeks, many people have described similar feelings. Sudden realizations, unexpected delays, emotional waves that seem to arrive without warning, plans shifting, conversations surfacing, old memories resurfacing for no obvious reason. And now, on March 3rd, we move through a total lunar eclipse in Virgo, an alignment that, symbolically speaking, carries the energy of culmination, release, and recalibration. This is not about fear. It is not about catastrophe. And it is certainly not about predicting dramatic external events. This eclipse is about something much more personal. It is about closure. It is about purification. It is about releasing what no longer aligns with who you are becoming. A total lunar eclipse occurs when the sun, earth, and moon align perfectly. In that alignment, the earth casts its shadow upon the moon, and for a moment, the familiar light is dimmed. Symbolically, eclipses represent times when hidden things come into view, not because something new is created, but because something previously unseen is revealed. In Virgo, this revelation takes on a very specific tone. Virgo is associated with refinement, discernment, service, health, habits, routines, and the countless small details that shape our daily lives. Virgo energy asks questions like, is this working? Is this alive? Is this sustainable? Is this healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? When a lunar eclipse falls in Virgo, those questions intensify. Lunar eclipses are traditionally associated with culmination and completion. They show us the results of choices already made. They illuminate the consequences of patterns that have been building quietly over time. They bring matters to the surface so that they can no longer be ignored. This particular eclipse is also aligned with the South Node, symbolically representing what is familiar, habitual, comfortable, but not necessarily growth-oriented. The South Node is the comfort zone. It is the pattern you fall back into without thinking, the coping mechanism you developed years ago, the routine you keep repeating because it feels safe, even if it no longer serves you. And when a lunar eclipse activates the South Node, something in that comfort zone begins to dissolve. For some, this may show up as the release of a habit. For others, it may manifest as the end of an obligation that has weighed heavily on the heart. For others still, it may feel like a shift in identity, a realization that the version of you that carried certain responsibilities, certain anxieties, or certain expectations is no longer who you are meant to be. Virgo energy can sometimes become overly critical. It seeks improvement, but in doing so, it may focus too much on flaws in ourselves or in others. It can become perfectionistic, hyper-aware, over-analytical. Under this eclipse, many may become aware of how much mental energy has been spent trying to fix, perfect, manage, or control situations that were never meant to be controlled in the first place. And that awareness can feel uncomfortable, because Virgo wants to solve the problem. But the South Node eclipse says, this is not about solving. It is about releasing. Releasing the need to be perfect. Releasing the need to have every detail planned. Releasing the belief that your worth is measured by productivity. Releasing the habit of self-criticism. Releasing the quiet voice that says, it's not enough. At the same time, the North Node, the symbolic direction of growth, is in Pisces. Pisces energy invites surrender, compassion, imagination, faith, and the ability to trust what cannot yet be seen. If Virgo represents precision, Pisces represents flow. If Virgo represents analysis, Pisces represents intuition. If Virgo represents effort, Pisces represents grace. This eclipse asks, where have you been trying too hard? Where have you been gripping tightly to something that is ready to fall away? Where have you mistaken business for purpose? Eclipse seasons often feel chaotic because they accelerate awareness. Things that were quietly misaligned suddenly become obvious. Conversations that were avoided suddenly must happen. Decisions that were postponed suddenly demand attention. But chaos is not always destruction. Sometimes chaos is clearing. Think of a snowstorm. At first, it appears disruptive. Roads are blocked. Schedules are interrupted. The usual rhythm of life slows down. But beneath the inconvenience, something else happens. The world becomes quiet, blanketed, cleansed, simplified. Old footprints disappear. Noise is muffled. The landscape looks different. This eclipse carries a similar energy. Something may feel disrupted, but beneath that disruption is purification. Because Virgo is deeply connected to service, health, and systems, this eclipse may also bring awareness to collective themes around work, healthcare, civil service, and the invisible labor that sustains communities. But rather than approaching this from a dramatic or fear-based perspective, consider the deeper symbolism. Virgo energy often serves quietly. It supports others. It handles details. It keeps things functioning behind the scenes. Under a South Node eclipse, there may be recognition that those who have been overlooked in our personal lives or in the broader world deserve acknowledgement. On a personal level, this may show up as recognizing your own unseen labor. How much have you been carrying? How much emotional work have you been doing quietly? How much responsibility have you taken on without complaint? Sometimes the release is not about quitting your job or ending a relationship. Sometimes it is simply about laying down the internal pressure to hold everything together. Mercury, the planetary ruler associated symbolically with Virgo, is also retrograde in Pisces during this time. In symbolic language, Mercury retrograde suggests revisiting, rethinking, reflecting, and recalibrating. In Pisces, Mercury encourages inner listening rather than outer noise. So while external events may feel busy or unpredictable, the deeper invitation of this eclipse is inward. Withdraw, reflect, reconnect. Not in avoidance, but in recalibration. There is something profoundly healing about stepping back when everything feels urgent, because urgency is often an illusion. Virgo likes to fix things immediately. Pisces understands that some things resolve only through time and surrender. If you have felt overstimulated recently, if you have felt pulled in multiple directions, if you have felt as though life has been moving faster than you can process, this eclipse may mark a turning point. A moment where you realize that not everything requires your intervention. That some patterns must complete themselves. That some endings are not failures, they are fulfillments. Lunar eclipses are sometimes described as meetings with destiny. Not in a dramatic, predetermined sense, but in the sense that we encounter the natural consequences of past choices. You planted seeds months or years ago. Now you see what has grown. Some of it flourished. Some of it did not. Virgo energy does not judge the harvest. It examines it. It asks, what nourishes you? What drains you? What needs pruning? What deserves cultivation? And then the South Node adds another layer. What must be composted? Composting is not destruction. It is transformation. What decays becomes nourishment for what is to come. In this sense, the eclipse is not erasing your past. It is recycling it. Every lesson, every mistake, every attempt, every disappointment. Nothing is wasted. But some forms must dissolve so that new forms can emerge. If you have been clinging to an identity rooted in perfectionism, this eclipse may loosen that grip. If you have been over-functioning in relationships, this eclipse may highlight imbalance. If you have been neglecting your own health while caring for others, this eclipse may demand attention. If you have been focusing so much on details that you lost sight of your larger purpose, this eclipse may expand your perspective. Virgo sometimes struggles with imperfection. Pisces teaches that beauty exists precisely because of imperfection. There is something profoundly liberating about realizing that you do not need to fix everything. You do not need to rescue everyone. You do not need to analyze every emotion. You do not need to meet impossible standards. Sometimes growth looks like letting go of self-criticism. Sometimes maturity looks like softness. Sometimes wisdom looks like stepping back and allowing life to unfold. Under this eclipse, compassion becomes the remedy. Compassion for yourself. Compassion for others. Compassion for the human condition itself. The North Node in Pisces suggests that the path forward is not through control, but through connection. Recognizing that we are all navigating uncertainty. Recognizing that we are all imperfect. Recognizing that the need to be right, efficient, productive, or flawless may be less important than the need to be kind. As this eclipse passes, you may notice subtle shifts. A conversation that clarifies something. A decision that suddenly feels obvious. A burden that no longer feels necessary. A realization that changes your perspective permanently. Eclipses often function as turning points not because they create new realities instantly, but because they change how we see the reality we already inhabit. And when perception changes, behavior follows. You may begin to prioritize differently. You may choose rest over overwork, authenticity over approval, flow over force. You may realize that some relationships were sustained by obligation rather than resonance. You may understand that certain habits were coping mechanisms rather than true preferences. You may discover that what once felt urgent no longer feels essential. That is not regression. That is evolution. The phrase fated release does not mean something is taken from you without consent. It means that what has reached completion can no longer be held in suspension. The eclipse reveals where completion has already occurred, even if you have not acknowledged it yet. And yes, there can be emotion around this. Grief, relief, confusion, clarity. Sometimes all at once. But beneath the emotional waves, there is alignment. Because when something falls away that no longer matches your growth, you are not diminished, you are refined. Virgo refines. Pisces trust. Together, they create a powerful combination. Conscious surrender. Not passive resignation, but intelligent release. As you move through this eclipse, consider asking yourself, what am I ready to let go of? Where have I outgrown my own expectations? What patterns feel heavy rather than supportive? What would change if I trusted myself more deeply? You do not need immediate answers. Sometimes simply asking the question opens the door. In the days surrounding March 3rd, allow space. Slow down where possible. Limit unnecessary noise. Journal. Reflect. Listen. Not to headlines, but to your own inner signal. Because ultimately, this eclipse is not about the sky. It is about the internal alignment between your spirit, your emotional world, and your embodied life. Sun, moon, earth, spirit, soul, body, momentarily align. When that alignment occurs, even symbolically, it invites recalibration. A reminder that destiny is not a dramatic event. It is a series of subtle adjustments. A redirection here, a release there, a softening of resistance, a strengthening of trust. By the time this eclipse energy integrates, which can take weeks, you may find yourself standing in the same physical place, yet feeling entirely different. Because what has shifted is not the world around you. It is the lens through which you see it, and that can change everything. If life has felt chaotic recently, consider the possibility that it has been clearing space. If plans have shifted, consider the possibility that something more aligned is quietly rearranging itself. If emotions have surfaced, consider that they may be asking for acknowledgement rather than suppression. This is not a time to force clarity. It is a time to allow it, to let the snow settle, to let the dust clear, to let the old patterns dissolve without drama. And as they dissolve, notice what remains. What remains is truth. What remains is authenticity. What remains is the version of you that no longer needs to prove perfect or perform. The March 3rd total lunar eclipse in Virgo may feel like an ending, but endings are thresholds, and thresholds are sacred, because when one chapter closes, even quietly, another begins, often with more alignment, more compassion, and more inner stability than before. So if something in your life feels like it is fading, if a role feels complete, if a habit feels unnecessary, if an expectation feels outdated, trust that release is not loss. It is preparation, a faded release before a new chapter. And as you move forward, imperfect, evolving, human, remember that refinement is not about becoming flawless. It is about becoming real. And sometimes, in order to find yourself, you must first allow yourself to let go.